Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a winter warmer. One of my favorite styles that really you only get in the winter, so I'm always fortunate to be able to grab some. This is from Stormbreaker Brewing. I've had a few of their beers in the past though. It's been quite a while. Never had a winter warmer from them. This one specifically has been brewed with raspberries and orange peel, and they were kind enough to tell us what hops they used, and they used specifically Fuggle and Sterling. So some classic bittering hops, UK, but not very high alpha acids, so not pungently bitter forward. Stormbreaker is based in Portland, Oregon, and this beer specifically clocks in at 7.5% ABV. So really a nice high ABV range for this nice warming wintertime beer. So starting with the label art, here we've just got a picture of a winter coat, so barrel-aged winter coat. And on here specifically, it kind of gives you touches on exactly what it is that they did with this. And this was specifically aged in Bull Run bourbon barrels for 12 months, so a year, in some nice quality bourbon barrels. So we've got a really nice mix of ingredients in this beer. So in terms of label art, just shows a nice picture of a winter coat, and they kind of point out, oh, like they're pointing out aspects of the jacket, and that's where they tell you, oh, here's the malts, here's the hops that we used, etc., etc. So overall, sounds very interesting. Winter warmer, I've had a few that are barrel aged. They're always tasty, goes very well with the beer style, but I've never had one that has fruit. So this raspberry edition ought to be quite interesting, and of course the orange peel, but that's relatively classic. So we have a nice wax bottle here. We're going to use my nice handy dandy pointy tipped bottle opener here to just score all the way underneath the edge of the cap into that wax. It's quite thick on here, so this may take me a couple goes to get a good grip, but let's just see if we get lucky here. Yep, we got lucky here. Cap can fall on the floor, that's fine. Just going to clean up a little of that residual wax so it doesn't drip down in my glass, but we're going to get this one poured right in. Oh, that is a classic winter warmer color. It's just a little bit darker than your average barley wine. That is typically how they look. I don't think I will quite get the whole thing in there, but that's okay. I can tell you, as soon as I started to pour it, I could really get the bourbon coming off of this one. It's quite pronounced. It does have a very pronounced aroma. Let's take a peek at it. Yep, it's got this slight ambery color to it, so it's kind of a reddish brown. I'm guessing that is coming predominantly from the addition of raspberry, but you can definitely see it in there, though the camera is likely not picking it up as I'm holding it up to my LEDs. Offset here, I can see very deep red hue. In terms of head, formed a pretty decent one. It's a pretty active carbonation style typically, so sometimes you'll get a really thick creamy head, sometimes just the carbonation will overtake it, and you'll get a little pad, a little cling to the edges like I'm seeing here. But looks great. Let's get over for a proper sniff. Oh yeah, wow, that's quite nice. So, on the nose, you can really pick out that bourbon, but I can really smell that honey malt sweetness lying underneath it, as well as I can pick up very distinctly the orange peel. Now, surprisingly, there was only the slightest hint of raspberry coming through on the nose, but what I do get is big, bold, pungent aromas, and it smells quite nice. Now, I can tell you the bourbon barrel, as is typical, is also giving off this subtle kind of caramelly toffee and vanilla aroma, and I'm also picking up what smells a little bit like cinnamon. Though they didn't add it in here, it does kind of have that smell to it, so it smells quite nice. It smells very much like a prototypical winter warmer, so I'm expecting this is going to be tasty, but with these interesting ingredient additions, we'll see exactly what it's about. Let's jump right in. Oh man, that's a very tasty beer. Oh, that's a very tasty beer. Ooh, it's big. Those are pungent flavors, folks. Okay, so before I even get into the flavor, I was really paying attention to the body and the mouthfeel there. This one at 7.5%, That's kind of sitting in the average to high average range of a winter warmer. They tend to be heavier beers, hence the name winter warmer. They warm you up, they're heavier, they're higher ABV. This one really feels about right. It's a nice medium heavy body to it. They are full-bodied beers. There's a lot of malts in these. In terms of the mouthfeel, it's got a good bit of resistance to it. They are thicker, so it really feels exactly the right weight and the right mouthfeel that I expected on the winter warmer. Now, the first thing I could tell you upon swallowing was the bourbon comes very intense, pungent explosion of flavor right up front. It's got this subtle underlying booziness to it, very distinctly taste of bourbon. So you've got all these underlying caramel and toffee and vanilla notes that come out just like they do in the aroma. But then behind that, really start to open up and kind of blossom is the way that the flavor kind of developed. That intensity of underlying maltiness that this beer style is known for. It's very, very bready. It's very doughy. It's a very malt-forward beer style and really is classic in this beer right here. There was a lot of honey sweetness to it mixed with that malt coming on the back end of that bourbon. That was very, very prominent. You can pick up a little bit of that orange peel, but I'm kind of surprised I didn't get really any raspberry at all on the flavor profile on my first sip. So I'm going to be paying very close attention on my second sip while I jump back in, see if I missed anything, and think on this flavor development a bit more and the finish. Very creamy. Yep, big bourbon, toffee, caramel, vanilla, little orange peel. The malt's really starting to intensify. Very malty, very doughy. Very subtle bitters. The raspberry, it's in there, it's very subtle. It kind of comes on the back end. The bourbon is so intense that it kind of has to start its decay and get down a good bit as that malt bill is kind of blooming up in intensity before the raspberry really becomes apparent. It is subtle, but it's in there. So you can pick out everything that they put into this beer, and it all works very well together. Overall, I would say this is a classic winter warmer that's been done very, very well. Some interesting additions I never thought that I'd see in a winter warmer, but I'm glad that somebody is out there trying new things. I think it works. Overall, a very, very nice beer. In terms of the finish, so there's a lot of flavor intensity happening here, but it's not an overly bitter beer style. This one obviously using very low alpha acid content hops, just some classic light bittering hops, and not in abundance here. It's not super bitter. So yes, there's intensity of flavor, but that noticeable lack of bitterness doesn't typically on this beer style have a very, very long finish at all. And this is no exception. I'm sure that there are some that are maybe a little more bitter forward. This one's very much just a classic average in that respect of how the finish develops. So it's exactly what I expected. Overall, again, just a very, very nice beer. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores. When I come back, I will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. Again, this is Stormbreaker's Barrel-Aged Winter Coat, a bourbon barrel-aged winter warmer that's been brewed with raspberry and orange peel. This one clocks in at 7.5% ABV, and Stormbreaker Brewing is based in Portland, Oregon. So, starting with the aroma, as expected on a big beer like a winter warmer and a barrel-aged version at that, it was a massive, massive aroma. Immediately as you started to pour it from a couple feet away, you could really pick up those bourbon aromas, got right over it. You could pick up the subtleties the bourbon brought to the table and that massive malty malt bill. It was really incredible. The aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste on this one, I really enjoyed. In fact, if it didn't have the addition of the raspberry, it easily would have gotten a perfect score. But the raspberry was so subtle on the flavor profile that frankly, I mean, it was in there, but you really had to work for it. I would have liked a little more pungency to come through. I think it would have really paired well with the underlying flavors of this base beer style and the bourbon barrel. So that's really the only reason that I docked it. I only docked 1 point though. Taste does get a 9 out of 10. For the body, this was a nice medium heavy body on a very big beer style. It's exactly what I expected for a winter warmer of this ABV range. Body does get a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, very similar to the body. Again, it was rather textbook for the style in this ABV range. Had a nice bit of resistance, nice bit of viscosity, rather creamy when you agitate around the palate. It's exactly what I expected. Mouthfeel does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish. Finish on this beer was quite long, significantly longer than your average winter warmer, but then again, this is a barrel-aged version. So, even without the barrel aging, I think this would have had quite a long finish anyway because it did have quite a large pungency of flavor. The malt bill was very big and very present and very intense, and that really pushed out the length in tandem with that bourbon barrel. It was tremendous. Finish does get a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did okay. It was basically average. Some are quite a bit foamier than others. Some basically none. This was kind of in the middle, so average. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook winter warmer. It does get a 10 out of 10. For the balance. Overall, I thought the balance of the beer was very, very nice. Really, the sticking point, same thing I mentioned on the taste. For me, it impacts the balance a bit more because that's exactly what the category is about. That raspberry, it just needed a bigger presence for that addition to be known. It was barely discernible in the aroma and just the slightest bit of detectability on the flavor profile. I mean, you really had to work for it. And I think that with that addition, it would have been really nice with the other ingredients and what else they did to this beer, but it really didn't come through that strongly. Overall though, for what it was, raspberry aside, it was a very good example. So I did rate this above average at a 7 out of 10 for the balance. Finally, the intangible. Overall, I really enjoyed the beer. This is certainly one of the better winter warmers I've ever had. I've had quite a few over the years. It's a style that's not that commonplace, but they're definitely worth seeking. Overall, I thought this was well above average. Feeling in the intangible subjectively for me, it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Overall, this beer did very well. It lost a few points in a few categories, but really it's just a very well done example of a winter warmer with some interesting twists that you don't always see. I thought it was well above average. Example of the style does get a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Stormbreaker's barrel-aged winter coat to an 88 out of 100. So this is definitely a well above average offering. It's got some unique twists. That raspberry, albeit subtle, was a nice addition. Orange peel is pretty commonplace, does pair well, and certainly the bourbon barrel aging was a smart move for this beer style because it is really cohesive in bringing all the flavors together. Overall, very enjoyable beer. If you're a fan of winter warmers, this is one I would recommend. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to know when our videos go live, just turn on the notifications, hit the bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.